Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Welcome again to another episode of the podcast that encourages and equips leaders to more effectively disciple the men in their sphere of influence. And to do that each week, we talk about the very best ideas and practices in the area of discipleship and ministry to men. Hey, my name is Troy Thomas. I'm your co-host today, along with the founder and executive director of No Regrets Men's Ministries, Steve Sonderman. Well, Steve, today we are going to be talking about capturing momentum after the big event, after the big deal, whatever that is. We put so much energy into events and seminars and weekends as ministry to men leaders, but what about afterwards? The big deal, it might be a conference, it might be a seminar, service project, work weekend, a baptism event, a golf outing, even special speakers on Sunday morning. And it's really whenever and wherever men's hearts are stirred, that's a big deal. Whatever the big deal is, the question really is, how do we capture the momentum from that big deal? So let's get into it. Steve, let's talk about the why first. Why is it so important to capture the momentum?
Yeah, Troy, this is such a key topic, and I'm so glad that we're talking on it today. And like you said, one reason why it's important is that so many leadership teams put a ton of energy into planning that big event or the big deal. And so whether that, like for us, is the No Regrets Conference, or it might be a men's retreat, and there's so much energy expanded or given to seeing that happen, is that you don't want to waste that energy. You want to capitalize on that energy. You want to capture the momentum of that event. So one reason is it's a way to capture the momentum and and not to lose the energy that was expanded to make it happen. I think a second reason is men's hearts are ready for something, is that they've heard a great speaker or they've been at a great event and they've had this experience, they've been with other guys and they're ready and they want to know, what's the next step? What do I do with all this? And it's a perfect time to sort of strike when the fire is hot. And so that would be a second reason that I would say that it's so important to really think about this and have a strategy for capturing it.
Steve, you've been around for a while, and you and I both have seen so many times where ministry to men happens and it's a big deal and everyone's on board and planning towards a singular event. And then it just kind of dissipates. It just finishes and the guys are so tired. They're spent after the event. And they don't do the follow-up.
Right.
They don't capture the momentum.
Yeah, and it leaves men frustrated, and it leaves your leadership team frustrated. So it's sort of, because they're asking the question, well, now what? And they don't have an answer for that. And because they're not being strategic, they're not thinking about pathway and moving men and seeing ministry as a process. And it can be really demoralizing for your leadership team if you don't have that next step in place, but also frustrating for the guys as well.
Steve, I'm reminded of a picture that we've used and talked about of like those Apollo Saturn V rockets launching, and how much energy it takes to get that huge rocket 30 stories tall off the ground. And at first it shakes and it shimmers and it's just barely moving because it's spending so much energy just getting all of that weight up in the air. And then once it gets breaks the Earth's atmosphere, it takes very little actually for that to travel all the way to the moon, right?
Right.
Or like a freight train. If you've seen a freight train getting started, it takes an awful lot of energy, but once it's rolling, get out of the way.
Yeah, those are beautiful visuals of what ministry is sort of about, and like when the power of an event, because if you do it right, there is so much power in that, and it truly becomes catalytic versus just an end to itself. And I love those pictures of what that looks like and what that means for ministry and ministry to men.
So, Steve, what happens when that momentum just is lost, when it's not captured? What is the downside of this? What is the damage from this?
I mean, it's just, I hate to be crass, but it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a lost opportunity to take men to the next level, to help them in their growth path. And another result is that you build a ministry that becomes just event oriented. And it's just a bunch of activities that have no connection to anything else. And so then it's an activity based ministry versus relationship based ministry. And that's where a lot of churches end up, not just in ministry to men, but as churches. They just become, what's the biggest and greatest thing we can do? And so you always have to have a better speaker or a better musician or a better testimony. And it's purely bigger and better. Well, you can only do that so long, right? And then you just lose energy from that. And I've seen so many ministries that have just petered out because they have not thought about the process and the pathway involved. And so,
Steve, say that again. It's two types of ministry. What were those?
Right. So you can have a relationship based ministry, which is where you guys are coming to your events because their buddies are coming. Yeah. It's not the big speaker, right, or the big musician or whatever. But you're growing a ministry that is based on relationship versus activity, and lots of ministries, unfortunately, are just based on activities.
Gotcha.
And so what we want to help you do is understand, how do I build a ministry that's based on relationship versus activity? And by capturing the momentum after an event is one way to do that.
That is so significant. So building a relationship-based ministry to men, what are some of the things that we can do, Steve, to try and capture that momentum? Before, during, or after the event?
Well, let me before I get into the specifics, let me piggyback on what you said earlier, Troy, to give the guys a picture of what it might look like to start, and then we'll go through and we can talk about some specifics to make it happen. The picture that I would use, and there's lots of ways to do this, but when I talk to leaders, this is one I use all the time, is a men's retreat. A lot of churches do a men's retreat, and oftentimes they'll bring in a speaker, they'll go up to a camp, and they'll have their retreat, and then they go home, and it's just another event. And there's no thought to what happens after. And so if I'm going to speak at a men's retreat, or I know when you do this type of ministry as well, we'll talk to the leaders and we'll say, okay, what's the purpose of the retreat? And how are you going to use this as part of your overall plan for the men of your church? And they'll sort of look at you cross-eyed and go, what do you mean, right? Tilt their head. And I say, well, listen, one of the goals is to get guys into small groups. And so why don't we have small groups after I talk? And so let's give them an opportunity for guys who've never been in a small group at least 3 times at the retreat to experience
a little taste of what a men's small group could be. I'll take my best leaders and I'll have them lead those breakouts, or tell the church to have the group I'm working with, have your best leaders lead those breakouts, because again, it might be the only time these guys experience a small group. So at least 3 times they've experienced it. And then I'll say, not only are we going to do a small group here, but when we get done on Sunday noon, what I would encourage you to do is have a couple of guys stand up and say, listen, if you enjoyed this time this weekend, we're going to start a couple of small groups to continue the momentum when we're done. You're not signing up for 12 weeks or 18 weeks. They're going to be 4 weeks, just 4-week small groups, no homework. You just show up. You make it easy. You make it doable for the guy to take that next step. So really kind of the step 0 is to have a vision for the ministry of men before you ever do the event, right?
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Great way. But that's the bigger picture that we're talking about,
Yeah.
that you could do that after a men's breakfast, after a retreat. We do that after the No Regrets Conference with the follow-up study. I mean, there's different ways of doing it, but always be thinking, what's the bridge to the next thing? That we're not doing this event activity, big deal in isolation, but it's always connected to an intentional pathway for discipleship.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some very
Yeah.
specific tactical things that leaders can do to capture that momentum, again, before, during, or after that event or whatever that big deal is. What are some tactics that they can?
Yeah. Principle number one, make the follow-up fit the event. So I think the example here is you're not going to invite the guys into a 16-week study of the book of Romans if they just volunteered at the food pantry, right? You want it to be consistent with what they just did, right? And it's a good fit. And so maybe the next step, if they were at the food pantry, is to invite them to be, to serve on the team for the food bank. That it's the step that you're asking them to take is consistent with the activity they just participated in. That's the key principle behind that. And that can play out lots of different ways.
And I'm sure you've seen this, but I've seen so many times where you're heading down one path with a guy, and suddenly, because there's an opening or you've got some other agenda, or you need a leader in some other area, suddenly you're doing a complete tangent in a different direction, right? I like that word you said. Keep it consistent. As you're inviting men into the next thing. Yeah.
Second principle is right size the commitment that you're asking for. So you have a men's breakfast and you got a bunch of guys from your church, and you maybe have a couple of guys there that are newer, and maybe you have a little table discussion after the talk, which I would really recommend to personalize it and bring home application. And a guy mentions something, or a guy takes the courage to speak up. You don't ask that guy then for a 3-year commitment to a Bible study, right? Again, it's right sizing the commitment, and what I'm always asking myself and encourage leaders to think through is this doable? Is this doable? And so the right sizing the commitment, if they just attended a men's breakfast, again, it's not a 1, 2, 3-year commitment. Maybe it's a 4-week commitment or a 6-week commitment. Maybe it's just for an hour. There's maybe no homework, but it's something that's, again, consistent and doable to what they just were a part of.
So let's talk about the kind of the psyche behind that.
Yeah.
Most men, especially newer to the church or newer to a journey with Jesus, have a fair amount of skepticism. They also have a large amount of insecurity, right?
Right.
And so we need to gauge that and understand where that man is at so that we don't overwhelm them right away and freak them out, right?
Totally. And I think one of the key things, Troy, is that you want to give guys time and you want to be patient. You want to create that safe environment. I know that, for example, we would always, after every men's breakfast, and we only did them 8 or 9 times a year. We didn't do them during the summer, but when we did them, we always would say, listen, if you've never taken that next step to being in a men's small group, we have a little study called Beginning the Race. It was a 6-week study, the basics, that is, again, it's available from us, and it's easy. The guys just show up. But here's the point. I know I had guys coming to breakfast for 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
Wow.
Who didn't take the step. And then finally, they'd show up at the table after and say, you know what, I think it's time to join a small group. I go, really? Half your life is over. I didn't say that, but I was thinking that, but it just took time. And you can't, like you said, force it. You want to give them space just to come to listen where they're comfortable. And at their time, they'll take that next step. Not that you always make the invitation, Always make it available, but also understand you have to be patient with the guys and let the Spirit of God draw them into that.
That's such an important point.
It really
As
is.
leaders, we need to be understanding how best to love our men. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's about meeting them where they are at.
Oh gosh, huge.
Right? We have to meet them where they're
Yeah.
at. And they might have obstacles like schedule or preconceived notions of what a study might be like or a small group might be like. Or they might have problems reading. I was dealing with a man recently who has a learning disability and can't read. So the idea of getting into a group and going through a study where there's weekly reading assignments was really intimidating. So we have to meet them where they're at and understand them, get to know them enough that we can invite them into the next step.
That's perfect. Amen. Listen up. Time spent in fellowship, prayer, and study with other guys is absolutely crucial in this day and age. But trust me, I know how overwhelming it can be to start, maintain, or multiply men's small groups. So No Regrets is here to help you. We have developed some new digital content called Basecamp, Bible Studies for Men. All the studies are found on our website at menwithnoregrets.org under Discipleship Resources. The optimal place for you to grow is a men's small group, and we are here to provide your group with the content you need. Hey, number 3, always have an ending point. And what we mean by that is guys want to know what they're signing up for, and they don't want to sign up for life. It's not like a life sentence to join a small group or to service team or whatever the next step is, but rather you are very clear. This is a 4-week commitment. This is a 6-week commitment. This is a 2-month commitment on this team, or it's for the semester. Whatever that, whatever they're signing up to do, that they know exactly what they're signing up. What's the commitment every week? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? And what's the length? Is it 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, whatever it is? You want them to know they're not handcuffed to that ministry, to that team, to that study, but there's a start time and an end time, and that's important.
Well, Steve, what about the deeper dive when you get to that point where it is a year-long study, or perhaps a 2-year study? How do you handle that situation?
Well, the way I handle it is that you grow men into commitment. And again, that takes time. But you start with that. Let's say you're doing a follow-up study to the conference like we do, and it's a 6-week study. They just show up and they go through it. And on week 5, we introduce the next 6-week study. And we'll say, listen, guys, if you've enjoyed this, if this has been helpful to you in your life, then we have another study called Following Christ. And it's 6 weeks long. And, if you want, we're going to continue on and do that. And so you're just slowly growing the commitment. And what I've discovered is normally, in 95% of the time, when you get a guy into a healthy small group and they start to experience that, you usually get them hooked, because as we've said here on this podcast before, they come for the content, but they stay for the community. And if the leader has done a good job of allowing guys to share their stories, if they've shared their history, if they've shared their hurts, talked a little bit about their heroes and their heartbreaks and their hopes, the 4 R's, if a leader has done that well, then most likely the guys are going to stay because they go, wow, I'm not the only one going through this. And they begin to share and they begin to open up. And so you're slowly growing the commitment. Then the 6-week turns into a 10-week, and the 10-week turns into a 12-week. And all of a sudden you're months down the pike, right? But the guy didn't start there, and he didn't think that. Started with 4 weeks or 6 weeks.
Grow the commitment.
Grow the commitment.
Okay, so we talked about making the follow-up fit the event. We talked about right-sizing the commitment. We talked about always having an endpoint. What else?
Well, the fourth one is You want to, and I like the title of this, you want to choose good second gear material.
What does that mean?
Well, here's what it means. I'm glad you asked that question, Troy. If a man is going to sign up, he's going to take that next step, you want it to be something that's engaging, something that is going to be of interest to them. Your second step, your next second gear is not, okay, let's study this 27 views of the second coming of Christ. Right? The guys really are not interested in that. They're not interested in theory. They want something that's very practical. And so what are those topics going to be? It's probably going to be something around being a better dad, being a better husband, understanding the purpose for my life, how do faith and work together, the whole aspect of integrity and things like that. What's the purpose for my life? It's going to be topics that are the key issues for men. That's why we called our follow-up study Beginning the Race, because we know that men are generally competitive. And that the Christian life is a race. It's a lifelong race walk with Jesus. And so we sort of use that idea of sports and athletics and all the terms that Paul uses throughout the letters to engage the men. And we talked about developing a band of brothers. We talked about finishing well and becoming a champion in life, and these topics and these themes that a guy could get excited about and engage with to take that next step. Yeah. So all that to say, if you're going to do something, whether it's a study or a team or an activity, that next step is engaging and accessible for men.
Yeah. I like that term, second gear material. It's not third gear. It's second gear. It reminds me of a pickup truck that I had as a teenager that had a manual transmission, and once in a while I'd go from first to third. And you know what would happen? It would make a loud sound, and sometimes it would stall out, and sometimes it would quit.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're doing with our guys sometimes.
Great illustration, Troy.
Yeah.
Great illustration. Yeah. It's just we're throwing them into third or fourth gear, and it just stalls out. Yeah. Because it's just not doable. The way the picture I have in my mind, I mean, I love the picture you just gave there. The other one I will use for the guys is if you're on the top of a tall building and there's a fire, and you have two options. One building is 20 feet away, and the other one is 8 feet away. And so which one are you going to choose? Right? Well, unless you're Michael Jordan or the great, long jumpers of the world, Kenny Harrison or people like that, you're going to take the 8 foot because that's doable. And the same thing. Sometimes we just make it undoable, and we're thinking they can do third, fourth gear and they can't. So, hey, fifth principle, start new groups for new men. Here's the principle we've learned over the years. It is so much harder for a man to join an existing group than to join a brand new group. When a guy joins an existing group, that existing group has stories, they have histories, they have inside jokes, they've been through material, they know each other's history, and it is normally really hard to break into that. Has it happened? Have I seen it happen? Yeah, I have. But generally, 90% of the time, it is so much better to start up new groups for the new guy than versus trying to force a guy or fit a guy into an existing group.
So, quick question: what happens if you don't have enough newbies to start a group?
Yeah, well, my suggestion is you start with who you have. Okay. And so if you're meeting with one guy, just start meeting with a guy, and start meeting on a weekly basis or a monthly basis and just start mentoring them and building into them and investing in them. We just did a podcast, I don't know, maybe a month ago now on mentoring. Go back, listen to that one and just start doing it with that guy. And then, if there's 2 or 3 guys, Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered, I'm there. And so don't worry about numbers. Don't worry about numbers. Just take what God gives you and begin to meet with them and invest in them. And just slowly, as you go, just invite guys to join and to get started. That's one thing. Or you just wait another month and say, listen, just wait. We're going to make another. We're going to continue to look for some guys, and we're going to fill out the group, and then we're going to start it. We did that as well. So I don't know if either one's right or wrong, but there's different ways to approach it.
Excellent. Okay, what else?
Number 6, help men take the next step on the spot. Strike when the iron is hot. Okay, so what does that look like? I'll give you some examples. So, for example, let's go back to the opening illustration of the retreat. I wouldn't wait a week or wait a month till next men's breakfast and say, hey, we're starting some new small groups for those guys that were at retreat. I'd get the guys up right there at the end of the day on Sunday before the guys leave, before you go to lunch, and every guy's got a card to evaluate the retreat. But then also, here's what I want to do. I want to join the retreat team next year, or I want to join a small group, because Bill and John just explained, Bill's doing a group on Tuesday night, John's doing it Tuesday morning. You're giving them different options, and they can sign up right there. I still remember the old days of Promise Keepers. We'd have 7, 8, 9 buses going up to Minneapolis or Chicago or Indianapolis. And on the way back from that activity, on every bus, we had a guy get up, captive audience, and share his testimony about being in a small group. Then we passed out a piece of paper on the bus, and before they got off that 6-hour bus ride, they had signed up and said, here's my commitment, here's what I'm going to do next. Yeah. And it was unbelievable.
Captive audience.
Captive audience, right. Strike when the iron is hot. Yep.
Good.
And then number 7, make a personal invitation. Okay? As a leader, you have the opportunity to personally invite guys to take that next step. And the point is this: never underestimate the power of your position. Is that you're a leader and people are looking up to you and they want to follow you. And when a guy gets invited to be in your group or to be on that certain team or to take the next step with you, whatever that is, that's a big deal, and they look up to you. And so just don't underestimate that power and the position that God has given to you. And in some ways, you want to leverage that for good and to help men take that next step.
Wow. Steve, this is an outstanding list. Let me just go through these quickly. Mm-hmm. For guys, grab a pen and write these down. First, make the follow-up fit the event. Second, right size the commitment you're asking for. Third, always have an ending point. Next is choosing second gear material, not third gear material, second gear. Fifth, start new groups for new men. If you've got newbies, start a new group. Next, help men take the next step on the spot with the captive audience concept. And then finally, you're a leader, make the personal invitation. You have a special power as a leader of men that allows you to get into men's lives and invite them to take the next step where perhaps they wouldn't listen to somebody else. So make the personal invitation. Those are 7 tactics for capturing momentum after the big deal, whatever your big deal is, guys. So Steve, this is an outstanding list. I think this is going to be so helpful for so many men.
I just want to real quick, Troy, just throw this in there for guys that are listening. If you're doing an event with your ministry, which my guess is you're all probably doing some type of event, I would really encourage you with your team of guys that are planning the retreat or planning your breakfast or planning whatever that event is to listen to this podcast together. Listen to it, and then in your next meeting, talk through, okay, what does this mean for us? How might we capture the momentum at our next event and make that a topic of conversation for your team so you don't lose the momentum from whatever your next event happens to be.
Fantastic. Well, Steve, our time is up once again. Leaders, thank you for listening. We pray, we hope this has been helpful to you as you go and make disciples of men in your sphere, your ministries to men. So thank you for dialing in. Don't forget something very important. If you find this podcast helpful, let us know. Leave a comment, like us, share our show. However that happens on your platform, please give us that feedback. For Steve Sonderman, I'm Troy Thomas. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.menwithnoregrets.org/podcast.